六八 mighty.
Hi everyone, this is Mr. Ng. In this video, I'll be focusing on the editing component found in the O-Level Paper 1. For those of you who are unfamiliar to these things, allow me to introduce a few important points to you. This section requires you to identify and edit grammatical errors in a prose text. This is different from the editing component in a primary school, where you have to identify grammatical errors and spelling errors at the same time. The text consists of 12 lines. The first and the last lines are correct. For 8 of the lines, there is one grammatical error in each line. You are required to circle each error and to write the correct answer in the space provided for you. There are 2 more lines with no errors. You will need to identify these 2 lines and put a tick for each of them. This is also the component for which my students often make careless mistakes. They would always ask me the same question: how can I minimize the careless mistakes I make for editing? And so, in this video, I will share with you 5 useful tips and habits you can all practice. This can help you minimize the number of careless mistakes you will make for this section. The first thing you need to do, even before reading the passage, is to write the following set of letters at the top of the passage: SPCA, WSTV, PC. What are these letters, you might ask? Each of these letters stand for an editing error type in the passage. Take a second now to pause the video to familiarize yourself with the editing error types. These error types are the ones that can appear in the editing section. Writing them down at the top of a passage allows you to use them later to check your answers. Let me show you how to use the SPCA checklist using a very short excerpt from the 2020 O-Level editing passage. For this question, I should circle in and write on the space provided. This is because the expression should be on top of the world, which refers to feeling extremely happy about a situation. For this question, I would tick P to represent prepositions because it corresponds to that type of grammatical error. I recommend ticking on top of the corresponding letter in your SPCA checklist. These letters you tick should match the error type you have just corrected. What you should note is there should be no more than 2 errors per error type. So ticking ensures that you will not identify more than 2 of each error types. For instance, if you found a second preposition error, then put a second tick on top of the P on your SPCA checklist. In this way, if you come across a third preposition error, it's a big telltale sign that one of your answers is wrong and that you should have a relook at them. For the second error, the issue is that the wrong article was used. The is the wrong article to use because the writer is referring to a general feeling of well-being, not a specific one. On the other hand, error 3 shows how a singular noun is needed, experience, instead of a plural one. This is because the writer is referring to just that one trip which he took. When you are done with correcting the passage, you should check that you have a total number of 8 ticks since there are 8 errors in the passage. Isn't this a foolproof way to ensure that you have not left out any errors? I hope I've convinced you to give this checklist a try in your next practice. The next question you might have for me is, how am I to remember so many letters in my practices? Fret not, I've thought of words for each letter that will make remembering them much easier. Just remember this short sentence: SPCA will save the very poor cats. I first used this sentence 10 years ago, and till this day, it still helps me to remember the error types. So I hope that it will help you to remember them as well. This next one is a very useful tip you can use to check for the main tense of the passage. Since the first line in every editing passage is error-free, it would also mean that the tense for that particular line is always correct. This would also give you a very strong indication of the main tense of the passage. I would write the tense on top of the first line as a reminder. So if, for instance, the first line is written in the past tense, you can safely assume that for the rest of the passage, the main tense will be in the past tense. Writing the tense out is useful because you can always check against it, especially when you come across verbs that are written in a different tense. That should be a clue that the verb is written in the wrong tense. However, do note that tenses can change depending on the context of the passage. But more often than not, the dominant tense in the passage should be reflected in the first line. One good habit to practice is to read and look for errors in the editing passage one sentence at a time and not one line at a time. This is because very often, a sentence could be longer than one line in the editing passage. So a clue for a particular question could appear in a line before or after that line. If we read and search for errors only one line at a time, our minds might not be conscious of the clues that come either before or after that line. Let me use the extract that you have previously seen to show you what I mean. For error 3, the word "and" is a clue that you need a singular noun, experience. You would have missed this clue if you read the passage line by line, instead of reading the entire sentence from "my whole trip" to "family and friends." So train yourself and make a conscious effort to search for errors one sentence at a time and not one line at a time. The last tip I wish to share with you is not so much a tip that you can practice in the exam, as it is a tip you can adopt and practice regularly. The best way to prevent and minimize careless mistakes is to learn from them. Studying and revising the mistakes you've made in editing does you more good than doing one practice after the other. You will learn more from studying and revising the mistakes you've made for one practice than doing 50 different practices without revising the mistakes you've made at all. The best tip I can give you to minimize the careless mistakes you make for editing is for you to revise them. For those errors that you identified correctly, try explaining out loud why you think they were wrong. When you've completed a handful of practices, revisit them after a few weeks. Then cover up your answers, redo them, and see if you learned from the mistakes. On top of the 3 previous tips, I think that revisiting and redoing your previous editing practices, when done regularly, will truly help prevent you from making careless mistakes. Before I bid you farewell, let's recap the 4 things you can do to help minimize careless mistakes. 1. Use the SPCA checklist to check your work. 2. Read the first line in the passage for the tense and write it on top of the passage. 3. Read the passage sentence by sentence and not line by line. Finally and lastly, revisit, redo, and study completed editing practices. This brings us to the end of this video. I hope that you'll find these tips useful and put them to good use in the future. Until my next post, stay happy, stay safe, and stay healthy. See you again. If you've been enjoying our content, do remember to like and subscribe.